put those overflows. We're also trying to connect that plant to the Central County facility so that we have a better distribution system for that reclaimed water. And with respect to buttoning up the system is a really interesting issue that we've been dealing with in stormwater for a number of years, and that is that it's a real challenge to talk about water quality to people when you have water in your living room. And we're really in the flood business, right? And so we really try and determine, you know, what can we do cost effectively to keep water out of people's homes? And that's been the emphasis of the stormwater program here in Sarasota for going on 30 years. And we've spent almost $500 million to do that, and have been very, very successful in that regard. But one of the things that we haven't really looked at is where we have roadway flooding and we may have a wastewater lift station. Because when we have wastewater overflows that are occurring during a rain event, that's exactly where that water is coming from. That's stormwater that's getting into the system, overwhelming a pump station, and now it's mixing with the wastewater and discharging out into our bay. Now, from a nutrient standpoint, not a big deal. There's just not that much water involved in one of these spills. However, from a human health standpoint, it is a big deal. There are fecal coliforms, virus, all kinds of things that are in that water that we do need to be very concerned about. And it's really just a recent change in our focus in the industry of stormwater to start looking more situationally on where we have localized flooding, in particular in proximity to the wastewater collection system and the major wastewater lift stations are throughout the community. We're in a little bit unique situation in Sarasota County stormwater, and that we're also the city's stormwater engineer. So the city, we also do this service for the city of Sarasota. And we've been having those conversations with the city utilities department to start giving them that level of service and that level of effort in looking at their system as it relates to stormwater. So it's a new area of focus and something that is being done industry-wide.
Go ahead, John.
Well, I sympathize with both Chuck and Justin. I have kind of sat in both seats, and as an elected official, it's often very tempting, as Ray can tell you, to look at an option that is going to be a more immediate and less costly remedy that is compliant with the law, rather than a long-term vision that is also compliant with the law, but in the long run will be more beneficial to the community, both in terms of social welfare and economics. And I personally believe that the county really needs to take a serious look at going from where we're at today to the AWT as opposed to the advanced secondary treatment, because it will just put us that far ahead. It will also provide us with a wastewater product that is more marketable, and as we continue to grow, the wastewater produced needs to keep pace with the wastewater market. And if you don't have a marketable product, you're just going to continuously be, you're going to be backpedaling, trying to figure out, okay, we're making more water, we can't sell it, what are we going to do with it, it's backing up. So sometimes it's better to make the advanced investment early on for the long-term vision rather than something that could be done legally, but probably is not as good of a decision in the long run. And that's something, that's one of the most difficult commission decisions that we make, because the community rarely understands it. It impacts ratepayers. And as soon as the message comes out that, hey, you know, we could have done this a lot cheaper and our rate would have been less, it's fodder for criticisms for those that are sitting in those 5 seats. That's a tough call.
I want to get a couple of just quick rapid. I know they can turn into longer conversation, put questions in, and then start taking some questions for the audience. But quickly, on septic and sewer, Ray, you were mentioning the severity of the problem in the Indian River Lagoon. Justin, just really quickly, how bad is the situation here in Sarasota County, and can Sarasota Bay become the next Indian River Lagoon?
Well, it's certainly a concern that we're seeing indicators of a decline in the health of our estuary in patterns that are suggestive of what happened in the Indian River Lagoon that led to a crash. I can't place the blame, and I think a lot of people have been doing the blame game over the last couple of years of like what is the culprit, whether it's septic, whether it's sewage, whether it's stormwater, whether it's ag. I think they're all important components of that. And certainly we as a community have to acknowledge the role that septic plays in the reduction of our water quality, and I think we've made a commitment and we need to keep pressure on increasing and following through on our efforts to reduce septic in this community.
Any other comments on this?
I do. One of the things I think that the county could benefit from greatly is an opportunity cost analysis of the various options that we have to reduce harmful or anthropogenic nitrogen into our surface waters. I know it sounds kind of bureaucratic, but what it means is that we know how much nitrogen is removed by moving to an AWT sewer treatment. We know how much nitrogen is removed from removing a certain number of septic tanks. We know how much nitrogen is removed by improving certain stormwater systems. What we don't have is that business-like attitude where we do an opportunity cost analysis because the funds are limited. We do not have enough money to do all of the sewer systems, replace all of the septic tanks, and fix all the stormwater systems. At least we don't for the next foreseeable future. So what we need is a science business-based attitude that looks at those options that are going to give the community the biggest bang for the buck.
Okay, quick question. I know the audience wants to hear it. We know we're just coming out of a horrific Florida red tide. We know that much of what happens in the initiation and development stages of red tide blooms occurs offshore. But we also know that once it gets onshore, it is extremely versatile with respect to using whatever nutrients it can get its tentacles on.
They're flagella.
Whatever it can get its flagella on.
Kind of flatulence.
If we were to make significant progress in this region of Florida in reducing the nitrogen that we're putting into our water bodies, do you think that this would lead to a noticeable impact on either the severity or the duration of Florida red tides? Who wants to go first?
All right, I'll start. And I'll try to hit it with the easy answer, no. And the reason I say that is that red tide is such an unusual algae that to really come out with a definitive answer, all that you can be is in the negative. That it's very difficult to manage that as an algae species in particular. And as an example, we all think about how algae and green plants absorb light. You know, that most of the algae that you and I see that are in a pond or in a creek, they're near the water's edge or maybe down a foot or two. We've all walked into a lake and felt it between our toes. Red algae can absorb light about 80 meters down in the water column because it only uses blue light in its growth pattern. So to deal with an algae that really only uses that small bit of the spectral signature that can only penetrate that deep in the water column is a very unique species. And so while we want to think that yes, as it moves out from its deep shore environment and comes into the near shore environment, that nutrients that it's killing, the dead fish and other organisms that it's killing, is contributing to its life cycle, that's a fair presumption. But to think that the human impact of our nutrients in that same ecosystem is causing, contributing, adding, or will reduce its impact is a real challenge to be able to say definitively. However, having said that, Blue-green algae is something that occurs at the surface, along with chlorophyll A, and we do know that these types of algae have a very negative impact on our ecosystems, and nutrients are an effect that on those algae. So while I can't say definitively that doing a lot of energy and effort on working on reducing nutrients are going to have an effect on red tide, I can say very definitively that reducing nutrients in our watersheds will have a positive impact on other algae, blue-green algae, chlorophyll A, and other algae that are important to our water health.
Any other bites at that apple before I turn to our audience? Yes.
So, Chuck is mostly right. Understanding the causal relationships of nutrients and any algae, in particular the algae that causes red tide, Peperina brevis, is very difficult. And waiting until you have empirical evidence that can, with statistically significant, say that this is happening is probably too late. There's another psychology and science called precautionary principle, and that is basically the principle of common sense. We know that this algae, this dinoflagellate, does like the very anthropogenic nutrients, nitrogen, that we are putting into the water. If we remove those nutrients, would it decrease the extent, the duration, and the intensity of the natural red tide blooms when they come ashore? It's difficult to say for sure, but common sense would tell you it probably would. Would it be noticeable to the layperson that only is in the state of Florida for 50 years? That's difficult to say because these oceanic cycles work in a series of centuries, not 5 and 10 years. But precautionary principle, or as I like to put it, redneck logic would tell me that if we were to focus on removing the human-based nitrogens from our surface waters that come from stormwater, wastewater, and agriculture, and I'm missing one, stormwater, industry. So, and let's say, for instance, the null hypothesis. Let's just say that it doesn't affect red tide. Oh my God, we're stuck with clean water. It's like, okay, now our kids can swim, we can eat the shellfish. That's the downside of removing these nitrogen and phosphorus products from our freshwater systems in the inland and those up in the coastal areas.
Let me take some questions. I know I've got more, but